Hello and welcome to the Commodities Institute podcast. I'm Emily Costa and today is February 26th, 2026. Thanks for spending part of your day with me as we slow things down and really unpack what's happening across global commodity markets right now. Because beneath the daily price moves, there are some important structural stories unfolding. Sources close to OPEC Plus say the group is preparing to consider a modest production increase of roughly 137,000 barrels per day for April. On the surface, that number sounds almost true in a market that consumes around 100 million barrels per day. But symbolism matters here. This would mark a resumption of output increases after a 3-month pause that reflected weaker seasonal demand. What's really driving this discussion is the balance between market share and market stability. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates want to reclaim barrels that have been left on the table, especially as others struggle with sanctions or technical setbacks. At the same time, prices have quietly strengthened. Brent crude is hovering near $71 per barrel, not far from a 7-month high, and that's largely because geopolitics has re-entered the conversation in a very real way. Tensions between the United States and Iran are doing what they've always done, injecting a risk premium into oil markets. Saudi Arabia, according to sources, has already activated contingency plans to boost production and exports if any disruption occurs in the Middle East. That's not a theoretical risk. More than 20 million barrels of crude and fuels move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. When producers talk about contingency, traders listen. What's striking is how calm the market appears despite these risks. The reason is trust. The market still believes that Saudi Arabia will step in if necessary, just as it has for decades. That belief is stabilizing prices even as tensions escalate. Now let's pivot to metals, because here the story is almost the opposite. Instead of abundance, we're talking about scarcity, very specific scarcity. Rare earth shortages in the United States are quietly worsening, particularly for materials like yttrium and scandium. These aren't metals most people think about, but they're absolutely critical. Yttrium is used in heat-resistant coatings that keep jet engines from melting. Without it, engines don't just become less efficient, they become unusable. Since late last year, yttrium prices have risen roughly 60% and are now nearly 70 times higher than they were a year ago. That kind of move doesn't happen unless supply is truly constrained. Several North American manufacturers have already paused production, not because demand disappeared, but because material simply isn't available. Almost all of the world's yttrium and scandium supply comes from China. While Beijing has technically eased some export restrictions, shipments to the United States remain extremely limited. For semiconductor manufacturers, this is becoming particularly dangerous. Scandium plays a tiny but essential role in next-generation 5G chips. Stockpiles are measured in months, not years. This is a reminder that energy transition, defense manufacturing, and digital infrastructure all rely on the same fragile mineral supply chains. Trade truces don't automatically translate into material flows, and markets are starting to price that reality in. Let's move now into agriculture, where weather and politics are colliding in uncomfortable ways. Ukraine's rapeseed market is under pressure as fears grow that extreme winter frosts may significantly reduce the upcoming harvest. Export prices for the new crop have already risen, reflecting expectations of tighter supply. Rapeseed is a cornerstone crop for Ukraine, and even modest acreage losses can ripple through European vegetable oil markets. At the same time, Indonesia is facing a different kind of agricultural challenge, one rooted not in weather, but in trade commitments. Under a new agreement with Washington, Jakarta has pledged to sharply increase imports of US farm products, including wheat, soybeans, and especially soy meal. The problem is scale. Indonesia has committed to buying more soybeans than it actually consumes in a year. Soy meal imports, in particular, are supposed to jump from a few 100,000 tons to nearly 4 million tons. Traders are openly questioning whether that's realistic. Demand simply isn't there. To make the numbers work, the government has shifted Feed Grain Purchasing Authority to a state-owned agency, effectively centralizing imports. That may satisfy political goals, but it risks distorting prices and burdening the system with excess supply. This is a classic example of how trade deals can look balanced on paper while, ignoring on-the-ground consumption realities. Now let's talk power and carbon, because this is where policy meets infrastructure. The US Energy Department has just offered a $26.5 billion loan to subsidiaries of Southern Co., the largest loan ever issued by the department's financing office. The goal is to strengthen grid reliability in the southeastern United States as electricity demand surges from data centers, electrified transport, and industrial growth. What's notable here is where the money is going. A significant portion will support natural gas generation, nuclear power expansion, grid storage, and transmission upgrades. This isn't a green-only strategy, and it's not a fossil-only strategy either. It's a reliability strategy. For commodities markets, this matters because it signals sustained demand for natural gas, uranium, copper, and battery materials. Grid investment is becoming one of the most important long-term demand drivers across energy and metals. Finally, let's touch on dry freight and shipping, because physical markets need vessels to move. Belgian shipping group CMB Tech reported stronger than expected earnings, benefiting from robust tanker and dry bulk markets. Sanctions on Russian crude have lengthened voyage distances, while steady commodity flows into Asia have kept bulk demand healthy. The company has taken advantage by selling older ships at strong prices and locking in long-term charters. Meanwhile, South Korea has issued a tender to buy up to 138,000 metric tons of corn, underscoring steady feed grain demand in Asia and continued support for freight markets. When you step back and look at all of this together, a clear theme emerges. Commodity markets are no longer just about supply and demand in isolation. They're about geopolitics, policy, infrastructure, and strategic control of resources. Oil is being shaped by contingency planning, metals by supply chain concentration, agriculture by political ambition, power by reliability needs, and shipping by the rerouting of global trade. That's what makes this moment so important and so fascinating. As always, thank you for listening to the Commodities Institute podcast. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review.